Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting APIs to Work. Today, we have a special guest to talk about the EPCIS Standard. Hey, Dom Guinard from GS1. Dom, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks, Eric. Nice to be here again.
Yes, well, thanks for being back. So our topic today is the EPCIS Standard. You are VP of Cloud and IoT at Digimarc. You have a lot of things to do with that standard. You were actually part of the creation of that standard. And today we'll just walk through it, explore what it allows people to do. And I think it's something that probably will have a pretty big impact on the world in the years coming, right?
I would surely hope so. That's the intention, at least. Yeah.
Let's jump right in. And so very briefly, for people who are very new to this whole space of EPCIS at all, what's your 3-sentence introduction of EPCIS?
EPCIS is essentially a way to standardize events that happen in the supply chain. And EPCIS 2.0 is actually bringing this standard into the web. Why should one care about that? Well, as we know, supply chains are under immense pressure. We've seen through the COVID crisis the fact that supply chains were by far not optimized and also not digitized enough. And we know that digitization, although it's not a silver bullet, can really help, as well as interoperability, being able to exchange supply chain events and different actions in the supply chain can really help with efficiency and transparency. And transparency is also a big topic because consumers nowadays really want to know where their stuff is coming from. Is it really organic? Where was it produced and how was it produced? And that information quite often simply does not exist. So this is the kind of things that EPCIS can help with by providing basically a common language for all supply chain events, as well as a set of common APIs that facilitate information exchange amongst supply chain partners.
And I think it was interesting that you were mentioning COVID, right? Because I think that just the term supply chain, I think before COVID was well known, but also something that not everybody probably was aware of. But I think by now everybody knows what a supply chain is and that it's really important for things to work well, that the supply chains work well. Otherwise, bad things can happen. So moving on to trying to digitalizing those, I think, is probably a worthwhile effort because, as we know, we don't want our supply chains to be disrupted.
Exactly. And if we look a little bit about deeper dive on what the challenges really were that supply chains were facing and still are facing, there is the resiliency and agility that we just talked about, where we had massive reductions in operations through the COVID crisis, through the lack of people to work in the supply chains. That was probably one of the core issues, but also the fact that information was not easy to exchange among supply chain partners, which led to big inefficiencies. End-to-end visibility is another aspect. Today, if you're a brand, you don't really have end-to-end visibility of your items. You might know where they're produced and when they're produced if you're lucky, but then you don't know what happens until they come to your warehouse quite often. There's also consumers really want to be able to trust brands a lot more. The trust of consumers, especially towards big brands, has been shattered in the past few years. And so they want to know more about the items. They want to make sure the items is what it pretends it is. They also obviously care increasingly more about the sustainability aspects, which again requires supply chain data to be able to present sustainability reports and rendering for consumers. And finally, if you're digitizing your supply chain, then you are already ahead of the game, but you might digitize it in a completely proprietary way, which is quite often the case, which means you might have visibility from your tier 1 suppliers, but beyond that, you have no visibility. This data might exist, but you just don't see it partially because there are no real standards that are used in many of these supply chain systems. So how is EPCIS 2.0 helping? Well, it simplifies data sharing and interoperability between the partners. It provides a standard way of capturing and querying the data, especially for serialized products, which are increasingly more present in our supermarkets or fashion stores. And it also allows interoperability with all kinds of supply chain hardware. So from readers to all the ways to tag and information systems can speak the same language. So that should really help tackling the business challenges. Again, it's not a silver bullet. There are many other challenges that need to be tackled, but that's one brick that might help really building the future of supply chains.
And I like how you're pointing out, the fact that just digitalizing things alone doesn't really get you that far if you don't have a shared understanding of what those digital things really mean, because then, well, you've digitalized the thing, but you cannot really meaningfully exchange data. And so anything, right, that covers that shared understanding, I think that is what really makes things scalable and composable. And that is what EPCIS really is doing in that case.
Absolutely. Yeah, because all these business challenges require information to be exchanged amongst partners, and not simply a brand view of their supply chain is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
We wanted to talk about an example of where supply chain standards can help, and in particular EPCIS 2.0. So that's one of our early implementations at Digimark of a live project that leverages it. So if you scan the QR code here, you can basically see a QR code that's on a pack of grapes, of Australian table grapes. And you can get the full traceability information from and about these grapes, which is very useful from a consumer standpoint to be able to assess whether they are sustainable, whether what they pretend. From a brand standpoint, it's also useful because it allows to authenticate the grapes. Sometimes Australian table grapes are sold as Australian table grapes, but they are not really. And so having the full traceability information helps with that. So there's here there's a supply chain aspect, supply chain efficiency aspect. There's a product authentication, brand integrity aspect, and finally a consumer aspect where this data, this raw data, can be rendered in a way that consumers can understand where the product is coming from. Just a neat example that's live today.
Yeah. And I have to admit that I did not know that there is a fake grape issue somewhere, but there is, it seems. And I think it's very easy to kind of look at other examples, right, where like you would have the exact same concerns and say, well, I want to buy the certain product, but I want to make sure that it really is what it claims to be. And the more I can show the supply chain of how this product got to the consumer, the more there will be trust around the fact that it actually is such a product.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as we make supply chain more transparent, we'll realize a couple of things, right? Important things like, table grapes could be counterfeited as well. Actually, I learned through my career that anything is counterfeited one way or the other. Anything of value will be counterfeited. And that's one aspect here. The other aspect really is traceability, right? Being transparent about the product, which is something that consumers are really keen to see nowadays.
Okay, so now let's look at how this can actually be done using EPCIS.
Exactly. So first of all, we shouldn't assume here that everyone knows GS1, although I'm absolutely sure that anyone watching this video has had in their hands a product that has a GS1 identifier on it. So GS1 is a standard body. It's probably one of the biggest on the planet in terms of countries represented. Almost all countries on Earth are a member of GS1, as well as brand, right? All brands that actually exchange products in one way or the other have GS1 identifiers on their products. So that's basically the famous barcode that you can see on every single product. That's the core of the GS1 standard, but GS1 standards go far beyond that. They basically have a set of identifiers, so the product identifiers, but they also have identifiers for places and etc., which you can see at the first layer. That's the identification layer. That's where GS1 is active. Then they're active at the second layer, which is the capture, basically all kinds of carriers, as they call them, which can be RFID tags, QR codes, NFC tags, or watermarks, in the case of Digimart, for instance, as well. Carrying these identifiers and being able to be read by all kinds of hardware in the supply chain. So that in itself already created big efficiency as compared to when we didn't have numbers for products. And then the last layer where GS1 is active is the share layer. So really the GS1 standards for data exchange. The idea that once you capture all these items throughout the supply chain, you should be able to do something with this data. And you have a couple of standards in there, amongst which EPCIS, which is really about information interchange. So it's quite a high-level standard from the GS1 stack that really deals with exchanging the information about supply chain events between supply chain partners. But also now with applications that you're building on top of this kind of data. That's just to explain where the EPCIS standard sits in the galaxy of GS1 standards.
Yeah, I think we're not, like, usually a lot of people are not quite aware of like how pervasive really GS1 is, right? That like every time you go to the supermarket, everything you touch basically has a GS1 identifier. So that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And these identifiers are now generic in the sense that they identify a class of product, but there is now a real push for these identifiers to become item level. So each unique product has its unique identity, right? And we have
I could now make a bad joke about like each unique grape, but I won't.
Yeah, well, that would be a stretch for one day, perhaps. I don't know. Yeah, and that's a big push, and this will really help also for better traceability, being able to trace at the item level.
You have a couple of examples here, basically, where I think which really nicely show how EPCIS gives you those building blocks, right, where you can assemble that based on your scenario in the best possible way to trace all the information that you need to trace. So maybe we can briefly look into like all these nice little building block sentences that you've created there.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, it's about capturing any step in the supply chain, even all the way now to also consumers purchasing the product, or nowadays increasingly more into recycling even. So really capturing each and every step in the life cycle of the product. And here I've just captured 4 steps just as an example. But then the crux of this slide is about what is it capturing for each event. And it's basically capturing the what, the when, the where, the why, and newly in 2.0, the how of each supply chain event. So if we take an example, like take here our packing example, for instance. So the what is we're seeing units A and B that are packed into case C. So the fact that you pack units into a case can be captured with the EPCIS language. Obviously, there's a date, an exact timestamp at which you do that, which is quite important for applications later on, and that's the when. Then there's the where, which is also standardized. There's the standard way of capturing places in the supply chain. And so here we're at warehouse W. Why is a very important aspect of EPCIS that's actually captured in a companion standard called the CBV, where you have all the terms that you can use to qualify supply chain events in that standard. And so here we're using the standard term shipping, which means you're shipping, obviously. And then finally, there's the how here. And how is new? That's basically the ability to capture IoT data as part of EPCIS events. And that I find quite fascinating, because I'm really amazed by some of the new technologies that are coming out. Printed Bluetooth tags that can capture temperature data, vibration data, light data. So there's really a world out there in a, let's say in 5 to 10 years, where labels will be a lot smarter, will convey sensory data, and now EPCIS can support pushing this sensory data into information systems in a standard way. So that's the crux of what the EPCIS standard captures. And then we wanted to talk about what's new in 2.0, right? The standard has been around for quite a while, actually. If I'm not mistaken, around 2007 is when the first iteration of EPCIS was pushed live. And it has been quite outdated in terms of technologies. And as you know better than anyone, using web technologies really help. Actually, you were a real source of inspiration at the beginning of my career to basically understand that web is really making APIs accessible. And that's an example, right, of where we take a standard that was outdated but really timely today. Nevertheless, because it was technically outdated, we couldn't really it didn't really get a lot of uptake. And now in 2.0, we're basically modernizing it. So it's now web compatible. Instead of being SOAP-based and WSDL-based, it's now JSON, REST plus webhooks. It's compatible with digital links, which is a standard way of doing identities on the web, which we talked about in another podcast of yours. And then it supports IoT sensors, as we said. So this is the core of the innovation in 2.0. In more detail,
and this, of course, when I saw this immediately made me very happy, right? It's like, yeah, there's an API there. So, and I think it's something, right, where everybody immediately understands, right? Like, oh, now I can easily access that, right? Like, there's like no hidden magic to it. There's like, it's just an API.
And it's game changing. It's game changing. And what was happening de facto is basically people who were adopting EPCIS were making their own REST and JSON standard on top of the SOAP standard, right? And that's not great, because there were, of course, massive discrepancies between the servers. So here we're trying to bring that back to one common way. And so in the standard, you have now JSON and JSON LD representations. You have a RESTful API for capturing, querying data. You also have a subscription API that's based on webhooks, but also supports WebSockets, where you can subscribe to any kind of event that you're interested in. And finally, you have this standardized business vocabulary, which captures things like steps, business steps, as we've seen before. And we'll share a couple of links if you want to know more, see the API and the examples. I know we'll share a couple of links at the end.
Yeah, we'll put all of this into the description of the video. So if you want to check out more resources, just check out the description, and you'll find links to the specification and so forth.
Yeah, and then wanted to finish to talk a little bit about the EPCIS ecosystem. The EPCIS generally, like I had the chance to be actually pretty close to the first implementation of EPCIS. Back then, I was an intern at Sun Microsystems, which became Oracle later.
That was a little while ago.
Yeah, it was a little while ago. It doesn't make me that young. And we were working on one of the first implementation, and I must say it didn't really deliver in the way we expected. I think because the world wasn't quite ready for transparent supply chains. Things have changed and massively accelerated lately. So you also see the ecosystem of players growing quite a bit. You have on the left side, you have a number of blockchains that are actually banking on EPCIS and providing EPCIS interfaces. One of our partners there is IOTA. We've been working on their EPCIS implementation and some pilots with them. And then in the middle, you have the enterprise SaaS that are providing either raw EPCIS features or added value on top. So Axway is an example, definitely SAP as well. And obviously, everything is also supporting EPCIS data in and out to implement use cases such as product authenticity or consumer engagement. So yeah, a few good players in that space. I don't know if Axway has already moved to 2.0, but hopefully that's also going to happen. And
I don't know either, but I'll check it. But it's great to see that X-Way is in there, and I think like all major platforms at some point in time, right? It's like all the really important standards. I mean, people just have to support them at some point. It's not a choice anymore.
Exactly. And then you have a whole set of system integrators, and finally you have brands who have adopted this standard. So I think some of the most well-known ones are Carrefour. In Switzerland, there's a big retailer called Migros. Decathlon has unique IDs for all their products based on EPC, so RFID tags with unique IDs. And we've also heard that H&M is now also looking into that, and there are several other brands looking into that. And they either have their own EPCIS or are working with enterprise SaaS like Axway or everything Digimark for these kind of implementations.
So I think what this shows us is that if you're interested in EPCIS or in EPCIS 2, there's a lot of support to count on, a lot of experience that you can already work with, right? It's not like this is something brand new. It has been, like you said, Dom, right? It has been around for actually a very long time in its first iteration, and now it already is supported and used by a couple of companies.
Yeah, and I think again the message is the first iteration wasn't that successful because I think it was too early for the market and for really digital supply chains. I think today we're going to really see an uptake that should go very, very quickly, because it is really a need that's present today on the market for all kinds of reasons that we have talked about before.
And we might see just more examples like the one that you showed with the grapes, right? Where if it becomes much easier to do these kind of things because everybody along the way speaks that language anyway, then we probably will see more things like that happening because it's not such a big effort anymore to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's the thing, right? You got to start with having the data, and then you can build the applications. As long as you don't have the data, you won't be able to build any application. And I think new applications will appear as we have much more of this data coming in. I think we're just at the very beginning of what we can do with this type of fine-grained supply chain.
Yeah. Okay, that's pretty cool. I'm really looking forward to, just like, let's say 2 years from now, we'll have another chat, and look at how did things change. And I'm pretty sure there will be some interesting examples along the way.
Definitely, yeah. I'm very positive this time that this will be a brick in the future supply chain systems. Surely hope so, because we've dedicated a lot of time and effort in making this standard a nice one.
I do remember that we talked about this standard a year ago, and you said, "Oh, it's going to be out any time now."
Wow.
And then there was another little kind of loops.
Well, yeah, but that loop was really interesting, like just in 10 seconds, right? It was basically community feedback. We got so much community feedback that it took us a year to implement it. And that's unusual for a standard. And it really shows clearly that this standard is timely. Yeah.
But also, exactly, right? It shows that the community is engaged, that the community wants to do it. So, well, looking forward to seeing that happening.
Definitely, yep.
Well, thanks so much for joining, Dom. This was another, I think, really interesting description into, what APIs can provide access to and what standards can do for us. I'm pretty sure this will have quite an impact. So thanks for joining. Any last words you want to have about, the future of EPCIS?
Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for inviting me. This was great. And then, I think, again, it won't completely resolve the problems of supply chains, but digitization will definitely help. And I think now we have a tool to do it right and to do it in an interoperable way, which is really what's needed here, because supply chains are, multi-stakeholder systems that are very complex. So being able to understand each other and have a lingua franca really will help here.
Thanks for closing with that. It's like my usual APIs are languages pitch, which I think is really one of the very interesting aspects about them. Thanks again for joining. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and until next time, keep getting APIs to work. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.